Disclaimer.
What if I told you the next financial crisis will not just hurt our portfolios, it will rewrite the rules of money itself? We have all heard the headlines, but the reality unfolding in 2026 is something we've never seen before. While we were going about our lives, our national debt quietly surged past $38 trillion. To put that in perspective, our debt is now growing by over $6 billion every single day. That is roughly $250 million every hour, or $74,000 every single second. It is a number so large it feels abstract, but for us, it is becoming very real. Think about the last time you sat down at your kitchen table to buy a house or even a car. You looked at the interest rates, the monthly payments, and the total cost over 30 years. You made sure the math worked before you signed your name. Now, imagine our entire country is sitting at that same kitchen table, but instead of a mortgage, we are looking at a credit card bill that is growing faster than we can even read the statement. The ink isn't even dry on the last billion before another 70,000 hits the ledger. Have you noticed how the conversations around the dinner table have changed lately? We are feeling the squeeze at the grocery store and the gas pump, and we're all wondering why our dollar doesn't seem to go as far as it did just a few years ago. But the true underlying pressure is coming from a place most people aren't looking. For the first time in our history, the interest we pay on that debt has surpassed our entire national defense budget. We are now spending more just to tread water on past borrowing than we are on the protection of our country. Think about that. We spend more on the interest of our debt than we do on our soldiers, our tanks, and our aircraft carriers combined. According to the Congressional Budget Office, net interest is now consuming nearly 14% of all government outlays. It's like working a 40-hour week and realizing that your entire Monday and part of Tuesday only exists to pay off the interest on a loan you took out decades ago. You aren't buying groceries with that money. You aren't saving for retirement. You're just paying for the privilege of being in debt. But here is where it gets truly interesting and a little bit unsettling. During the 2008 crisis, our leaders had a playbook. When the housing market collapsed and the dominoes started to fall, from Lehman Brothers to AIG, the Federal Reserve stepped in with what they thought was a magic bullet. They slashed interest rates from over 5% all the way down to zero. They had plenty of room to move, and they used every inch of it to flood the system with cash. It was a massive stimulus, a historic intervention that essentially told the world, we will print whatever it takes to keep the lights on. And for a while, it worked. The American economy rebuilt itself, jobs returned, and we moved on. But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody talks about. We didn't fix the problem back then. We didn't pay down the debt or restructure the system. We just kicked the can down the road. And as we stand here in 2026, we have finally reached the end of that road. As we sit here in February 2026, that 2008 playbook is effectively useless. Our interest rates are currently sitting in a tight range between 3.5% and 3.75%. If a major shock hits us tomorrow, if a massive bank fails or a global conflict erupts, the Fed only has about half the ammunition they had in 2008. They can't cut rates to zero and expect the same result because inflation is already a persistent shadow over our economy. If they cut too deep, our purchasing power evaporates. If they don't cut enough, the system freezes. We aren't just running out of money. We are running out of the very tools we use to pretend the money didn't matter. We've spent nearly 20 years living on borrowed time and borrowed interest, and the bill has finally come due. We've all been told that the cavalry is always just over the hill, ready to ride in with a bailout whenever things get rocky. We've grown accustomed to the idea that if too big to fail, bank starts to crumble, the government will simply step in and make everyone whole. But what if the cavalry is out of bullets? What if the very tools used to save us last time are the reason we are so vulnerable today? In 2008, we had a housing problem. In 2026, we have a systemic problem. We have a government that can't afford to borrow more because the interest is already eating us alive. We have a central bank that can't afford to print more without triggering a total collapse of the dollar. This isn't just another market cycle or a bit of bad news on the evening report. We are facing a fundamental shift where the old safety nets are fraying. Think about what this means for you and your family. Imagine you're planning for your retirement, looking at your 401k or the pension you worked 30 years to secure. You've played by the rules. You saved, you invested, and you expected the system to be there when you needed it. But the no bailout reality means the rules of that system are being rewritten in real time. We are entering a period where the math simply doesn't add up anymore. The federal debt to GDP ratio is now at a staggering 125%. In simpler terms, we owe more than our entire country produces in a year. If every single one of us, every teacher, every truck driver, every doctor, and every engineer worked for free for the next 12 months and gave every penny to the Treasury, we still wouldn't be debt-free. That is the gravity of the situation we are navigating together. It's a weight that every American feels, even if they can't quite put their finger on the cause. The immediate threat isn't just a number on a screen or a ticker tape. It's a loss of confidence. Our economy is built on trust. The trust that our dollar will hold its value and that our government can meet its obligations. When investors start to realize that the safety net is gone, they change their behavior. They stop asking, how much can I make on my investment? And start asking, how much of my investment can I keep? The shift in psychology creates a high-tension environment where every minor economic report feels like a potential trigger for a landslide. We are watching the bond market closely because that is where the real story of our future is being written. If the people who lend our government money, the pension funds, the foreign nations, and the institutional investors decide that the risk is too high, they will demand higher interest rates. And as we've seen, every tick up in interest rates makes that $38 trillion debt even more expensive to carry. It's a classic trap, a feedback loop that has swallowed great powers throughout history. Let's look at a scenario that hits close to home. Have you noticed the La Clause E for lease signs appearing in the windows of the office buildings in your city? Commercial real estate is a ticking time bomb that almost no one in the mainstream media wants to discuss. During the pandemic, the way we work changed forever. Offices emptied out and they haven't filled back up. Now billions of dollars in loans on these buildings are coming due in 2026. Normally, a bank would just refinance those loans. But in our no bailout reality, the banks are looking at buildings that are worth 30% less than they were 5 years ago. They can't refinance a loss. When those buildings go into default, it won't just be the building owners who suffer. It will be the regional banks, the banks where we keep our local business accounts and our personal savings. And this time, the Fed might not be able to just print a solution. So, as we dig deeper into this discovery, I want us to focus on the objective truths. We aren't here to spread fear. We are here to empower ourselves with awareness. Understanding that the 2008 solution, printing money and cutting rates, is no longer an option, is the first step toward true financial independence. We are looking at a world where the government's ability to intervene is limited by the very debt it created to solve the last crisis. It's a fascinating, if sobering moment in our history. It's the moment where we realize that we are the ones who have to be prepared, because the system is finally admitting its limits. Unlike 2008, there's no easy way out of this one. There's no magic bullet hidden in a basement in Washington, D.C. The rules we've relied on for decades are about to change forever, and the safety we have taken for granted is being replaced by a much more volatile reality. We need to look closer at the warning signs that are flashing red right now, from the bond yields to the bank balance sheets, because the 2026 reality is a world where no bailout is not just a political slogan, it's the hard mathematical truth we all have to navigate. It is time for us to look past the headlines and understand the mechanics of what is really happening to our money, our country, and our future. We have explored the fragility of the system's safety net, but to truly understand why 2026 is the moment the gears begin to grind, we have to look at the evidence currently piling up on the desks of the world MOS most powerful bankers. This isn't just theory anymore, the numbers are shouting. If you think back to the early months of 2008, there was a sense of uneasy calm before the storm. People knew something was wrong with housing, but the scale was hidden. Today, in February 2026, the scale is staring us in the face, and it's being documented in real time by the Federal Reserve itself. Just a few days ago, on February 4th, the Fed finalized its 2026 supervisory stress test scenarios, and the parameters they are testing for are nothing short of chilling. They aren't just looking at a mild recession or a soft landing anymore. They are running simulations where the U.S. unemployment rate spikes to 10% and commercial real estate prices collapse by a staggering 39%. Think about that number, 39%. That isn't a correction. That is a total wipeout of equity for almost every major office holder in the country. And why is the Fed testing such a violent scenario? Because they see the same time bomb we do. As of this month, nearly $1 trillion in commercial real estate loans are coming due this year. That is a 19% increase from 2025. These are loans that were written when interest rates were near zero, and now they have to be refinanced in a world where the 10-year Treasury yield is hovering above 4%, and vacancy rates in major cities have hit all-time highs. But here's the deeper layer of proof that should grab our attention. We often think of the economy as one big engine, but it's actually a network of regional gears. While the giant, too-big-to-fail banks on Wall Street have been building massive capital buffers, our regional banks, the ones that actually fund our local businesses and communities, are drowning in office loan exposure. Recent data shows that office CMBS delinquencies have surged to over 12% this month, a new all-time high that surpasses even the darkest days of the 1980s. When a local bank sees its commercial loan portfolio start to rot, it doesn't just stop lending on skyscrapers, it stops lending to the local hardware store, the construction firm, and the family farm. This is how a commercial crisis becomes a Main Street crisis. The proof is in the tightening of credit standards we are seeing right now. According to the January 2026 Senior Loan Officer Opinion Survey, banks are already reporting significantly tighter standards. They are pulling back the ladder, and they are doing it because they know the collateral, those glass and steel towers, isn't worth what the books say it is. Then, we have to look across the Pacific to see the other half of the pincer movement. For years, we've relied on China to be the buyer of last resort for global commodities and a major holder of our debt. But the Chinese property apocalypse has moved from a slow burn to a full-scale meltdown. Just this month, we saw the final symbolic delisting of Evergrande, a company once worth $50 billion that is now being picked apart by liquidators with $300 billion in debt. And it's not just one company. Country Garden and Vanke are facing similar fates. Why does this matter to us in the States? Because the Chinese property sector accounts for nearly 30% of their economy. As that sector implodes, China's demand for global goods vanishes. When China stops buying, the world stops selling. This creates a deflationary shock that hits our multinational companies, the ones in our 401ks, right in the revenue stream. We are seeing a K-shaped global reality where the richest institutions are trying to insulate themselves while the foundation of the global property market is literally crumbling. Let's put this in perspective with a scenario we can all relate to. Imagine you own a small business, or you're managed by one. For years, your business relied on a line of credit to manage inventory and payroll. That credit was easy to get because the bank felt safe. Now imagine your banker calls you and says, "We're not renewing the line. You haven't done anything wrong. Your business is fine." But the bank is panicked because the office building down the street that they also financed is now sitting empty and in default. They need to shore up their own balance sheet, so they cut your lifeline to save themselves. This is the contagion of 2026. It's not a sudden explosion like 2008. It is a slow-motion credit freeze that is beginning to lock up the gears of our everyday lives. And then there's the sovereign debt trap that is now closing. We've all heard about the national debt, but have you looked at the interest to GDP ratio lately? The Bank for International Settlements recently reported that global debt interest payments are now projected to exceed $10 trillion annually. For the United States, we are approaching a point where we have to borrow money just to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. It's the ultimate Ponzi moment for a nation. In 2008, our debt was manageable enough that the Fed could buy it all up to keep rates low. But today, the Fed is actually in the middle of reserve management purchases and trying to manage a balance sheet that is already bloated beyond recognition. They are trying to perform surgery on the economy while their own hands are tied by the sheer volume of debt they already created. The most damning piece of evidence, however, is the Buffett indicator, the ratio of the total stock market value to our national GDP. As we sit here in February 2026, this indicator is screaming that we are in a mania phase, sitting well over 200%. Historically, anything over 100% is considered overvalued. We are living in a world where the price of everything, from stocks to houses, is being propped up by a dwindling supply of credit and a massive amount of hope. But hope isn't a strategy, and math doesn't care about our feelings. When the Fed's own stress tests are modeling a 39% drop in real estate, they aren't being pessimistic. They are being realistic about the bubble they helped inflate. We have to ask ourselves, why are the insiders, the ones with the most information, moving into defensive postures? We are seeing record levels of gold buying by central banks and a quiet de-risking by the largest institutional investors. They are moving out of paper promises and into real, tangible assets. They see the K-shaped divergence where the lower income consumer is already under extreme pressure from 10% credit card caps and rising costs, while the high income cohort is starting to look for the exit. This isn't a conspiracy. It's a cold, hard calculation. They know that the no bailout reality means that when the music stops, there aren't enough chairs for everyone. This deep dive into the data shows us that the cavalry is not just late. They might not be coming at all. The 2026 crisis is fundamentally different because the people in charge have run out of ways to hide the truth. We are seeing the convergence of a domestic banking crisis, a global property meltdown, and a sovereign debt trap all hitting at the same time. The evidence is no longer hidden in the fine print of a bank's annual report. It's on the for lease signs, the delisting notices in Hong Kong, and the Fed's own doomsday simulations. We aren't just looking at a market correction. We are looking at a moment of truth for our entire financial system. And as we move into the final calculation, we have to realize that our best defense is not waiting for a rescue. It asks understanding the math before the rest of the world catches up. Now we reach the moment where the patterns of history meet the cold, hard logic of mathematics. We have looked at the fraying safety nets and the mounting evidence of a credit freeze, but the real question for all of us sitting at home is when? When does the pressure become too great for the system to bear? And what does the climax of this 2026 crisis actually look like for our savings, our homes, and our future? To find the answer, we have to look at the specific dates and price targets that are currently keeping professional risk managers awake at night. This isn't a guessing game anymore. We are tracking a collision course that leads directly to April 12, 2026. The date our calculations suggest the U.S. national debt will officially cross the $39 trillion threshold. Crossing $39 trillion isn't just a symbolic event. In the world of high finance, psychological barriers act like physical walls. When we hit that number, we aren't just looking at a high debt. We are looking at a debt that is growing at an exponential rate, while our economy's ability to pay for it is slowing down. Think of it like a plane trying to take off with too much weight. Eventually, it doesn't matter how hard you push the engines, gravity takes over. In our case, gravity is the interest rate on our debt. Right now, as we speak in February 2026, the 10-year Treasury yield is flirting with 4.5%. But if that yield crosses the 5.5% mark, what many insiders call the fiscal redline, the math for our country fundamentally breaks. Let me put this in perspective for our daily lives. If the interest rate on our national debt hits 5.5%, the interest payments alone will consume over 50% of all federal tax revenue. Imagine if half of every paycheck you earned went just to pay the interest on your credit cards, leaving you with the other half to cover your mortgage, your food, your insurance, and your children's education. You couldn't do it. You would have to stop paying someone. This is the no bailout climax. When the government can no longer afford to be the backstop for the economy, the market has to find its own level. And as we've seen from the Fed's own stress tests, that level is likely a 30 to 40% drop in asset prices. This brings us to the most critical calculation, the bond vigilante revolt. For decades, we'd have assumed the world would always want our dollars and our debt because we were the more safest bet. But trust is a fragile thing. If the people who buy our bonds, pension funds that manage our retirements, or foreign central banks, decide that the risk of a $39 trillion debt is too high, they will stop buying. This is already starting to happen. In the last few Treasury auctions, we've seen a tail, a gap between what the government wanted to pay in interest and what the buyers demanded. When that gap widens, it's a signal that the market is taking control away from the Federal Reserve. We are no longer in a world where the Fed dictates the price of money. We are in a world where the reality of our debt is dictating terms to the Fed. So, what is the specific target for our portfolios? Robert Kiyosaki and other veteran analysts have been pointing toward a great reset in the gold to silver ratio. During the panic of 2008, and again in the volatility of the early 2020s, we saw people rush into real assets when they lost faith in paper ones. As of this week, gold is trading near record highs, but silver is the one to watch. Historically, in times of extreme monetary stress, the ratio of gold to silver compresses. If we see silver prices gap higher while the stock market is sliding, that is the ultimate signal that the no bailout reality has set in. It means the big players are no longer trying to win the game. They are trying to exit the burning building with as much tangible value as they can carry. But here is where the climax gets personal. We have to look at the regional bank trigger. We mentioned the 278 American banks that are overexposed to commercial real estate. The calculation for these banks is simple but devastating. They are holding loans that are coming due. The buildings used as collateral are worth 40% less. If only 10% of those loans default, the capital of many of these regional banks is completely wiped out. Unlike 2008, the government can't just print a multi-trillion-dollar rescue package because doing so would push us past that 50% interest to revenue redline. This time, the bail-in rules, laws that were quietly passed after the last crisis, could come into play. A bail-in means that instead of the government using taxpayer money to save the bank uses your deposits to save itself. It's a sobering thought, but it is a reality we have to be aware of as we choose where to keep our liquid cash. Think about a typical American town in late 2026. The local regional bank, which has been a pillar of the community for 50 years, suddenly announces it is restructuring and limits withdrawals. Panic doesn't start on Wall Street this time. It starts on Main Street because the local businesses can get the cash they need to pay their employees. This is the rolling crisis we've been tracking. It's not one big explosion. It's a series of interconnected failures that trigger each other. Commercial real estate defaults lead to regional bank failures, which lead to a credit freeze for small businesses, which lead to higher unemployment, which eventually leads to a housing correction. It is the circle of debt finally closing in on itself. Is there an empowering way through this? Absolutely. Awareness is the only true hedge against a systemic shift. When we understand the math, we don't have to follow the herd into the panic. We can look at the Buffett indicator and realize that when mania is at an all-time high, it is the time for caution, not greed. We can look at the debt to GDP and realize that we need to be our own central bank. by holding assets that don't rely on a government S promise to pay. We can build our items. No bailout. Survival kit. 6 to 12 months of cash in a safe place, a diversification into gold, silver, and commodities, and most importantly, a debt-free lifestyle. If the country is drowning in debt, the safest place to be is on dry land with no weights tied to your ankles. The final warning is this. In 2008, we had time. The crisis unfolded over months, giving people a chance to adjust. But in 2026, information moves at the speed of an algorithm. We saw with Silicon Valley Bank how $42 billion can vanish in a single day through smartphone apps. When the fiscal redline is crossed, the market reaction will be instantaneous. The window to prepare is closing as we approach that April 12th date. We are not sharing this to create fear, but to give you the intelligence you need to stay ahead of the curve. Our country has survived depressions, wars, and crises before. We are a resilient people, and we will survive 2026 too. But we will survive it by being the ones who saw the pattern, did the math, and refused to be blindsided. The climax of the 2026 crisis isn't the end of our story. It missed the beginning of a new one where we return to sounder principles and more honest money. As the no bailout reality unfolds, the greatest wealth transfer in our lifetime will take place. It will move from those who trusted in paper promises to those who trusted in tangible reality. We are in this together, and by staying informed and staying prepared, we can navigate this storm and come out stronger on the other side. The cavalry isn't coming, but that's okay. We've always been our own best heroes. It's time to fix the roof before the rain starts. Stay informed, stay prepared, and remember, knowledge is our best defense.